Well, with a track record as spotty as The Tangent, oh boy, it's always a bittersweet revelation whenever they're putting out a new album, because it could be good, but it could also not be. So let's find out what we have in our courts for this one.
But nothing ever happens. No sacrifices due.
Songs from the Hard Shoulder by The Tangent. So The Tangent is a predominantly at this point UK progressive rock band. They got their start as kind of a conglomeration between the Flower Kings and Parallels or 90 Degrees. So you had like Roland Stolt and the Flower King boys on the one hand, and you had Andy Tellison and those boys on the other hand. They kind of came together with The Tangent. And I mean, even on the front cover of this first album, it kind of lists the personalities as kind of like what Yes was doing with Drama, where it was kind of like Yes and the Buggles kind of. It was supposed to be just like a one and done thing. But they followed it up with The World That We Drive Through, and it's, in my case, probably just as good. They really focused in on that, like, retro prog that like the Flower Kings were doing, but there was a lot more jazz influence on here. There's a lot more of this experimentation, a little bit more grit, a little bit more grab in that sense. And honestly, it wasn't until the 2006 release of In the Place of the Q that really knocked it out of the park for me, even though it was the subsequent album as not as good as the book that introduced me to the albums and The Tangent. A Place in the Q for me was what skyrocketed them into their own little stratosphere, because at that point, Roland Stolt stepped down, so they really were The Tangent being helmed by Andy. And since then, it's kind of been a little bit of a hit and miss in terms of quality. The two follow-ups of Down and Out in London is Paris and Calm, not so great, wasn't a big fan of those. Le Sac de Travail, brilliant outfit, friggin' love this album. Next two tracks of Spark in the Ether and The Slow Rust of Forgotten Machinery, didn't like it all. Proxy, honestly, was a massive surprise for me. Really liked Proxy. And the Auto Reconnaissance, nope. Really didn't do anything for me on that case. I think that was one of the few albums that I dread listening to, if I'm being honest. Just no, it's not for me. With so many kind of like influxes in terms of quality, I approached this one with a certain regard of hesitation, because in my past it's been 2 albums off, 1 album on in terms of quality, and this is coming up on the second of the quality off, shall we say, after Auto Reconnaissance. And I have to admit, this album did exceed my expectations. The caveat of that is that my expectations were rather low coming into this album. Now, what really kind of did it for me, and the thing that kind of knocked it over the edge for me, was the presentation of the music on here. There are 4 tracks on here with 1 bonus one, and so it allows the music to really shape and take fold. And this really is where The Tangent shines. They shine on a lot of those bigger tracks, the ones that are 7, 10, 20 minutes in length. And so we have, the Changes being at 17 minutes, the GPS Vultures also at being 17 minutes, The Lady Tied to the Lamppost at 20 minutes, and then Wasted Soul at just under 5 minutes. And then finally, it's almost a reinterpretation rather than a cover of the UK track of In the Dead of the Night, The Tangential Aura, and Reprise. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned, that I really do appreciate is the lengths of these tracks, because it really does allow the tracks to take form and to take shape, and allows Andy and the boys to really open themselves up in more of this like jazz approach. I still feel as though the biggest issue with a lot of these longer tracks when they're found in singularity is the structure of them. What it's really missing is a good foundation and a good structure for a lot of these rhythms and movements and flows to base themselves into, to allow for this good reprisal, for this navigation of sound and music. Because half the time it really does feel as though you're wandering the landscape. So let's talk about some of the individual tracks on here. I mean, there's only 4 or 5, depending on which version of the album you get. The first track of The Changes, I really do enjoy of being like a smoky jazz bar scene. Like the track opens up with this very luscious guitar licks, some fun bass work on that is provided by Julius Ringgold, who one of my favorite bass players, but I still feel as though his personality doesn't have a lot of chance to really shine on here. And Theo Travis on the woodwinds, the flutes and the clarinets and all that. Just lovely presentation of styles. But I also love the drumming. The drumming styles on this was really great. And Andy is able to kind of influence enough on here that you can still tell that it's kind of his band, his operation. And I love, again, some of the soundscapes that we have with his synthesizer and keyboards. And I mean, one of the things that does draw me out of the album, and it is something that draws me out of a lot of the Tangent albums, especially these later ones, are the amount of... trying to think of the best way to put it. The amount of homages, callbacks, and straight up, hey, remember this thing that Andy just... It's almost a compulsion at this point, I think, for Andy and the boys. Because, I mean, the overall concept of this track is, again, it's almost like a road log, a road journal, the changes on the road and touring, and then not being able to do that with the lockdown and whatnot, which was already kind of addressed a little bit in Auto Reconnaissance, but I feel like they're kind of talking about it in a post-shock and awe moment and more in a reflective, let's actually think about what happened kind of a sense. But man, there's still a number of points, and you'll know it when you hear it, of them basically saying, yep, they just couldn't let it be. They had to call it out. They had to put it on the table and scream at it. And it does bring me out of the track proper, but there you go. I do feel like the main root of this, that whole it's fun, it's interesting, but it doesn't really get me all that excited, and it does feel as though they've rooted the track along that piece, and it's fine, but I wonder if 17 minutes was a little too long. And again, that's a caveat because I still really enjoy the lengths and allowing it to breathe. This brings us into the instrumental track of the GPS Vultures, which is a little bit of a follow-up from the in the place of the Q instrumental piece of GPS Cultures. And there are some throwbacks. What I will say is writing a purely instrumental track that's beyond the 15-minute mark and still being able to keep the attention going, that's a feat. And I do feel as though Andy and the boys were able to do that. I love how much more of a jazzy aspect of this it is. And even though they call back to GPS Cultures in entirety at one point, it's not throughout the entire track. So it does feel like a continuation of the track rather than just a reprisal or a reinterpretation of it. I don't want to say this track goes on too long, but I do wonder, again, the structure of this is just a little off for me. I feel like they need a little bit more touchstones, a little bit more flushing out of the actual structure of this track to really hammer it home properly. Let's talk about the big track. Let's talk about the almost 21-minute The Lady Tied to the Lamppost. And the overall essence and the overall theme of this one is, the homelessness that's found in the UK and in, the world in general. I know it's a prevalent thing here in the North America. And this isn't the first time that an artist has tackled this issue. I mean, heck, Aqualung, just look at that. And this isn't even the first time that Andy has tackled this, but this is the first time that an entire track has been dedicated to it. And it leaves just the slightest bad taste in my mouth when a population as vulnerable as the homelessness are being used by an individual for their own art. It reminds me of the very potent message that Rent got across beautifully in this one interaction.
I don't need no goddamn help from some bleeding heart cameraman. My life's not for you to make a name for yourself on. Just trying to use me to kill his guilt is not that kind of movie, honey. Let's go. Hey, artist, you got $1? Yeah, I thought not.
Because it just feels so on the nose in that sense. And I mean, Andy basically comes right out and says it a number of times, like, yeah, I passed a homeless woman on the street, and now I'm thinking of lyrics for my own art's sake. Like, and I know I'm paraphrasing in that sense, but like, maybe they're not there for you to make art for. Like, maybe they're there to be helped, and maybe you want to work with your local constituents and your neighborhoods to do things for them. And I am getting off my soapbox because I could spend way too much time on here. And the music itself is probably the best music that's on this album. Like, I do love the build-up that's found at the end and the play-out that's found within it. Like, this epiphany that the boys have by the end of this track is so potent and so tangible. And that's one of the big highlights for me for this album. It leaves on such a beautiful and tasty moment that kind of makes a lot of the shifting around and not quite knowing where they're going to go musically or lyrically kind of well worth it, because I have something to look forward to after, you know, the 17-18 minute mark in that sense. And honestly, Andy and the boys haven't written a really, really good long track like this probably since Le Sac de Travail. I can say it. Because Proxy didn't really have that big standout 20-minute piece. And the bigger pieces that we had from like Auto Reconnaissance, it made me realize and sympathize with individuals that don't like progressive rock and have people like me try to shove progressive rock down their throats. So yeah. Yeah. It's a very interesting track. One lyrically and thematically that I kind of like over just slightly, but musically it is fantastic and it is quite brilliant and probably the best thing that Andy Tillison has written since Le Sac de Travail. Now this comes to Wasted Soul, and I feel like Wasted Soul is going to be the watershed of this album. Like, people are either going to love it or they're going to hate it. I personally love it. I love this little track. I love this little ditty. It is, on the one hand, it doesn't fit on this album in the slightest. It reminds me of like Sun in Your Eyes from A Place in the Queue, or it reminds me of that biker track from Not As Good As the Book, The Bat Out of Basilidon, I think that is. Just being like so off kilter, so strange. Like, it's reminding me of like Casey and the Sunshine Kids or Casey and the Sundance. I don't know. It was like the 70s funk R&B kind of rhythm and groove aspect of it. And it's so off kilter. It's so strange that I can't help but love it. And in my mind, it's honestly probably the best way to end this album, because then we come into the, the bonus track In the Dead of the Night, and it's fine. You know, I don't really have too much to say about it. I think it's a really good reinterpretation of the original piece from UK. And I think the boys do a great job at it. And I understand why it would be a bonus track rather than just put on the track proper. But yeah, there you go. So overall, Songs from the Hard Shoulder, it impressed me more than I thought it would. It exceeded my expectations, and I honestly had a good time with it. This one, though, kind of lands in the no man's land between great Tangent albums and forgettable Tangent albums, and even the bad Tangent albums. This is somewhere in like the good. It's good. Yeah, I mean, there was enough for me to come back to and really enjoy. There's enough meat and juice to really get a lot out of it. But it's still far and away from their best work. It's probably their best work since Proxy. And I still found myself enjoying it. So yeah, rating this one's going to be a little bit tough for me. But I think I'll still say Songs from the Hard Shoulder from the Tangent is still one that I would absolutely stream. You know, there's enough on here for me to come back to it, but not quite enough that it would warrant, say, like the download where, you know, I would want to have it on my computer and return to it very regularly. It's good enough for me to listen to, and I'm not going to like run to the stereo to turn it off, but it definitely wouldn't be the first choice that I have for Tangent to go and put it on. So there you go. A little bit of a mixed review for a mixed album, but there you go. I will say that at least it's a solid album from start to finish, and it's not a mixed grab bag, but yeah, I was just waiting for just a little bit more. So there you go. That's Songs from the Hard Shoulder by The Tangent. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And yeah, it's coming out this Friday, so keep your ears peeled and ready for that. And in the meantime, go and check out my Kate Bush Worst to Best. You can find that right up there. That's all I've got for you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, that's out.